I've mentioned the junction on the A62, the Brighouse Junction. I'll let you into a little secret and give you a little bit of advice, if I may. This first fortnight in August, don't go on the motorways. You will be run down by Methodist ministers in removal vans, because this in our pattern is the time when we move round, you know. But whether you're moving house or not, I find there are two kinds of people. There are very organised people, like my pal Caroline here, who will have everything on a spreadsheet. She knows exactly what she's got, where it is, where to find it. I, on the other hand, am not like that. I'm one of those who tends to hang on to everything. Over the years, I've had a magic box of charity shop curtains, because if they don't come in for this manse, they'll come in for the next manse. So I had great difficulty when I eventually sat down as to what to do with my magic box of curtains. I'm a bit of a hoarder. The magic box of curtains is still in the loft, because I work on the principle that it will come in one day. You know the way of thinking? Are there any? It'll come in. Oh, there's one over here. This is John. John over here is it'll come in one day. And even if I don't need it, somebody else will. I'll talk to John later. But I certainly admire those folk who work on the principle that if you haven't worn something for 3 years, you can ditch it and send it to the charity shop. But how many times have you sent something to the charity shop and then the following day or the following week, you've needed that precise thing? There have been times that I've ferreted around and I have come up with something in the loft that somebody else needs, but I confess those times are far and few between. Does it matter that something has been sitting in assorted lofts for 20 years in case? But it's a bit more serious than that. It could be quite harmless, but if the energy that I expend in keeping track of my stuff prevents me from seeing what is needed now, that's a different matter. What if I see my life in terms of what I've got, or see my needs in terms of whether they can be met by what I already know or not? It's a bit serious. Stuff. Jesus was talking about stuff, although I didn't quite catch that word in the version you read. Jesus was talking about possessions, but he was not actually bothered about the particular kind of stuff it was, but rather about how we hold them, or even more so, the hold they have on us. In some way, our possessions, our stuff, is a bit like a security blanket. And Jesus wasn't wanting us to be fickle or irresponsible, but he was wanting me and us to realize that our treasures, albeit in the loft, are still nearer earth than heaven. So, before you move, you clear out files and cupboards and oh dear. So it is about decluttering, that's the fashionable word, but it's also about saying, well, what is it worth keeping? What is worth keeping and why? And I think sometimes we need a little bit of encouragement, or even a kick up the backside, to do and to be the people that God wants us to be all along. So this kind of decluttering is about us as well as the loft. Sometimes I've met folk who've said to me, "Oh, Christine, I've been meaning to come to church for a long time, but you know how it is. I've not had time. I'm stressed out. I've had to do overtime. The kids and the grandkids need ferrying hither and yon." And all that was before COVID. And all of that was before COVID. And I know it all needs doing, and it's right and proper that all of that needs doing. But in this reading, Jesus is telling us our relationship with God is as important, as urgent, as all of the rest of the stuff that we have, or the rest of the stuff that we are about. He's not saying that the roof over our heads, the food on the plate, the clothes on our back are not important. But hey, little flock, don't be afraid. Your God is pleased to give you the kingdom. Is pleased to give you the kingdom. And it doesn't do it half-heartedly. It doesn't do it grudgingly. But what was that phrase? It gives him great happiness to give you not just a taste or a peek at the kingdom, but to give you the kingdom. The rest of the stuff, the rest of what is about, how does it sit alongside that God is dead chuffed to give you the kingdom, to share with you the fullness of his heart of love and grace? That is the unlimited generosity of God. You will have noticed that the summer, or the beginning of the new year, or any other week in the year, is actually the week of sales. So whether you've bought your new kitchen, whether you have bought your mattress, whether you have bought your life policy or your Motability scooter or your reclining bed, all of them have this phrase at the end: this offer must end soon. And no, I'm not on any commission for all of the rest of those things. But I want to say to us that the offer of God's grace is unlimited. The offer of God's grace is unlimited, but it does have a best before date. And that best before date is called our mortality. That's what the reading is saying. We don't know the time or when it's going to kick in. It's not about being morbid. It's about being honest. It's about being realistic. And of how we meet our eternity is just as important as any of the other stuff that we surround ourselves with today. But we live in those odd times, contradictory times. On the one hand, we are seduced into thinking that we are indestructible. But COVID taught us otherwise. And yet, on the other hand, so much of life is disposable. Paper cups, cutlery, cameras, razors, but also, dare I suggest, manners and morals as well. Or is that just me that's getting old? But if we were to press that pause button on our life, on our living, what would the snapshot of today say about you and me? About what is important to us, how we hold stuff, how we relate to each other. And so Jesus holds up this picture of a returning master. Certainly that's a picture, and there are those who read this parable as well as being the story of Jesus's return. As to that, we'll have to wait and see. But whichever way we read this story, the thrust is the same, that our lives should be lived in constant awareness of God's presence. Are we alert to God's influence, to God's claim on our lives, alert to God's presence and blessings? The faith that we have, living in faith, is not about believing 100 impossible things before breakfast. It's about being in tune with God, working on the principle that if I'm a radio freak, I can't listen to Radio 1. If we are to live the life of faith, we are to seek out, to desire, to need to be alert to the presence of God himself. Now, at this point, I shall make no comment on a leadership contest that starts with earrings, suits, and shoes, and only then moves on to what drives and motivates the candidates. Nor will I inquire of Hyacinth with the blue periwinkle, but I will ask, what is it that drives us? How does our understanding of God motivate us? How are we aware in our personal, our church, our community, and even our national and international life, aware of the nudgings and prompting of God? How do we give the things of God our attention? We may well speak of the day that when we meet our Maker. This parable tells us that each and every day is a day that we are meant to be ready and alert and sensitive to the presence and demands of our Maker. We are every day under the gaze of God, and every day we are meant to love the Lord our God with all our heart, our soul, and mind and strength, and love our neighbour as ourself. It's a bit big. And that's what is asked of you and me. And if we had read the epistle this morning, we would have read that part in Hebrews where there's that great long list of names, and John is delighted he didn't have to get his teeth round those names. That great long list of names of so-and-so by faith did this, so-and-so by faith did that. And it's that gallery of faith, those people who are doing impressive things. But I suspect their doings are secondary to the relationship with God that they had, out of which came their deeds of faith. These were people who were in tune with God, who were ready not because of their doings, but their doings came about because they were alert and ready in heart to God. Now, being alert and ready and aware. I have to apologise for my husband. I frequently apologise for my husband. He is a Sheffield Wednesday fan. He is a Sheffield Wednesday fan. And if ever somebody says to us, "Oh, Christy, what are you doing on Saturday? Do you fancy?" Robin's first response is, "Where are Sheffield Wednesday playing?" That is his first impulse. Is our awareness of God that sharp? That forefront in our minds and hearts? Are we alert to God's presence and prompting in that saying? Prepared and alert. Those were the words at the end of the reading. Looking out for what God is doing and showing where God is nudging. I have a couple of pals who I meet with from time to time, and out of our conversation, we sort of nudge each other, and they've said, "Oh, how's the week been? Have you seen something of God?" And that sort of sounds, it sounds a bit big, but in our conversation, we'll say, "Well, such and such happened." And you'll realize in the conversation, oh, that wasn't about me. That was a God nudge. That was a God moment. And it's sometimes in those conversations where I actually realize and see something that I hadn't seen and noticed before. So it's that helps keep me on the right track. But then it reminds me too of the stuff of the kingdom, you know, the stuff that we had in the loft. So what is the stuff of the kingdom? Love, joy, peace, compassion. And have you noticed that's the sort of stuff that you don't hold in your hands, but you hold in your heart and you live out every day? These are the things that can't be stuffed in a cupboard, but to be real, they have to be offered, shared, and lived out. So as we read this story, as we see the picture, would that we then respond to the circumstances and experiences of life with that awareness and alertness to God. Would that our names might be written in that great gallery of faith in Hebrews. And by the grace of God, they are. And for that, thanks be to God. Amen.